The chamber reeked of arrogance high above the shimmering glass floors of the Galactic Space Council. Species from across the known universe murmured in a dozen tongues, some vibrating, others clicking, still more transmitting thoughts that made the weaker members of the delegation twitch. Earth didn't speak here. Earth listened. That was the rule, one of many made after humanity barely crawled from its third planetary war, their home still smoldering under the scars of climate collapse and resource riots. Admiral Kane stood at the back of the chamber, arms crossed behind his back, jaw clenched tight. His eyes, two tired shards of coal, didn't wander. He wasn't impressed by the floating nobles of the Thrick Coalition, or the gelatinous mind-binders of Venturi Prime who floated in nutrient pods with smug thought clouds hanging over their heads. No, Kane had seen worse in the war camps of Jupiter's moons. He'd starved beside dying men in Titan's rust storms, pulled burning flesh off his arms while holding the line in the Europa siege. These creatures, these council members with their perfectly sterilized morals and sterile diplomacy, didn't know war. Not like Earth did. Humanity's proposal for independent fleet deployment is denied. Again, the Hellerith speaker said with disdain, eyes glowing like twin emerald suns. His voice carried across the chamber with the weight of a verdict already written. You are a recovering world, nothing more. A client species under observation. The words weren't a surprise. Kane didn't flinch, but deep in his ear, under the collar of his black uniform, a whisper came alive. It's time. Kane tapped his wrist. Once, above the chamber, the stars themselves began to blink out. A flicker, another, then 10 more, like the galaxy itself was holding its breath. A sudden buzz filled the council room. The Venturi pods shifted. The Thricks squawked in confusion. The luminous fungi of the Kaleri spun in place, glowing violently in alarm. Then the chamber's vast central view screen rippled open into full cosmic display, and silence fell. They were there, 5 massive objects, each one darker than the space around them, hovered outside the orbital ring of the council planet. No heat signature, no energy spike, no drive emissions, just void, pure, engineered black. Human warships. Not theoretical ones, not concept art stolen by council spies. Real. Operational. Right there. Dark matter vessels. Impossible by council standards. A decade ago, humanity didn't have the capability to even harness stable fusion on a mobile platform. And now, in front of every major power in the galaxy, they had just parked 5 world killers on the council's doorstep, like a grim invitation. Kane stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until he stood in the circle where speeches were usually offered by submissive, desperate representatives. I came here to ask, he said, voice low and grim. Now I'm here to tell. The Hellerith speaker opened his mouth, but Kane raised a hand. No more denials, no more leashes around Earth's neck. We asked for partnership, and you treated us like a parasite. You talked unity, and you enforced hierarchy. You stole our tech, siphoned our data, and ridiculed our blood, all while you built fleets around us. He stepped closer, his boots echoing against the ancient floors of diplomacy and peace, both long-dead concepts to him. These ships, Kane said, nodding to the voids beyond the screen, are not threats. They are answers. You asked what humanity could do when left alone. Well, this is what we do. The Thrick ambassador screeched something in its tongue. A translation came a second later. Is this a declaration of war? Kane smirked for the first time in weeks. No. This is a funeral notice. For the old order. Another tap on his wrist, and one of the warships, just one, powered a weapon. There was no glow, no charge-up sequence, no trembling of energy. Just gone. A council moon nearby, one used for training simulations, blinked out of existence like a candle crushed under an unseen thumb. No explosion, no debris, just void. The chamber exploded into chaos, screeches, telepathic screaming, delegates scrambling. Kane didn't move. He'd made his move years ago when they first told Earth to wait while they exploited its ruins. Now they were the ones watching, trembling, and Earth was finally speaking, and speaking loud. The weight of silence. The screams hadn't stopped, not really. Even after security sealed the chamber and flooded the exits with containment fields, the panic hadn't died. It just went quiet. The kind of silence that made men clench their teeth and feel the sweat bead down their spine. The kind of quiet that makes generals stare at the floor and rethink their decades of assumed superiority. Admiral Kane stood there like a monolith, calm amid the storm. His pulse barely moved. This wasn't power for him. It was justice, delayed, twisted, and earned in blood. He remembered Mars. He remembered the tribunal on Phobos where a Kalari diplomat spat at the image of Earth's starving colonies and accused humanity of evolutionary failure. That same envoy now sat slumped in his containment shell, glowing dim green like algae waiting for the sun to return. Kane didn't look at him. He remembered the trade embargo that let Earth's third exo-economy collapse. The Hellerith laughed back, then. Their laughter had echoed through the satellite feeds while children in New Nairobi died clawing each other for scraps of algae paste. Now those same Helleriths stared wide-eyed at the void where a moon used to be. Kane turned his head slowly, speaking into the implant behind his ear. Status. The reply came in a calm, deep voice from the Bastion. The lead Dark Matter Warship now parked in orbit like a loaded gun resting on a negotiation table. Fleet locked. All 5 vessels active. Cloak integrity at 100%. Primary. Weapons charged. Targets mapped. Awaiting confirmation. Kane nodded slightly. Hold. We don't speak again unless they beg. He turned and walked off the council floor without a single body daring to stop him. Even the chamber guards, those ceremonial things draped in gold robes and carrying pulse staves, simply looked away. They'd seen what silence meant now. Real silence. Not peace, but the hollow, suffocating aftermath of erasure. The Shadow Fleet took the transport shuttle back to the orbital dock alone. 2 hours later, aboard the USS Bastion, the bridge was cold, not from malfunction, but by design. Dark Matter Warships didn't run on the Council's accepted standards. There was no room for luxury or morale. They were steel coffins with teeth. Machines built in orbital dry docks far from any known routes, in systems never mapped, operated by men who volunteered to disappear from Earth's records and live in permanent shadow. Captain Briggs stood at the helm console, hands behind his back. His face was as rugged as the mountain ranges they'd left behind on Earth. Scarred cheek, nose that had been broken more than once. Ex-Marine turned naval commander. A loyal bastard and one of the few Kane actually trusted. Shepherd 1 reports. Planetary lock, Briggs said. Council world defenses are frozen. Their networks tried to scan us 3 times. Failed. You want to start rattling the sword? No, Kane said, stepping onto the bridge. Let them choke on silence. Briggs smirked. Never thought I'd see the day, he muttered. They spent years telling us we weren't ready, that Earth needed guidance, that we were too emotional, too volatile. Kane's voice was quiet, almost conversational. They weren't wrong. We are emotional, and we are volatile, but not weak, never weak. He looked through the viewport at the planet below, the Council world, a marvel of civilization. Perfect climates, floating cities, intelligent wildlife bred for decoration and peacekeeping, a paradise, a lie. The Council fed Earth's desperation for decades, Kane said. Gave just enough aid to keep things from collapsing, but never enough to let them rise. Because a rising Earth was a threat. Not because of their weapons, but because of their will. We built these ships under their noses, Kane said, because they wanted us to stay broken. It's not the technology they fear. It's what we'll do once we're not hungry anymore. Briggs nodded. So what now? Do we torch their fleet and make an example? Kane exhaled through his nose. No. That's what they expect. A rabid animal lashing out. We don't need to burn planets. All we need to do is wait. Wait for what? For them to offer us the seat they refused for a century. But now they won't do it out of pity. They'll do it out of fear. Emergency protocol back on the Council world. Emergency session 6 hours post-event. The room felt smaller now. The floating seats had been lowered. The usual pageantry was gone. No diplomats, no ceremonial robes. Just the core leaders of the most powerful species. Panicked, sweating, cornered. Speaker Valon of the Hellerith stared at the projected image of the 5 Earth warships with a tight jaw. How did they build these? Silence. No one answered, not because they didn't know, but because it didn't matter anymore. Asking how Earth did it was a question for scientists and historians. Right now the question was, what happens if they use them again? A small, nervous clicking came from the Venturi representative. His pod light dimmed in stress. They bypassed our surveillance, our trade restrictions, our arms limitations. We assumed. The translator hesitated. We assumed they would fail without assistance. The Kalari pulsed orange in agreement. That assumption may have doomed us. The room turned toward a single figure standing quietly near the back. Commander Jarth Saul of the Council Defense Fleet. Human, yes, but a Council loyalist. One of the few who had turned his back on Earth years ago for status among the stars. Now he looked like a man caught between 2 burning bridges. You knew Kane, Valon said. I served under him, Jarth replied stiffly. Before he vanished from Fleet Command, I thought he'd died on Titan. And now Jarth stared at the hologram again. Now I think Kane never vanished. He just went where we couldn't follow. Valon stepped forward. What does he want? Jarth answered without hesitation. He wants everything we denied Earth. Control, autonomy, respect. Valon scoffed. Is he insane enough to wage war? No, Jarth said. He's worse, he's patient, and if we give him a reason, he'll erase more than moons. The silence was thicker than before. A single option remained, negotiate. But to negotiate meant acknowledging Earth as an equal, something none of them were prepared to do just months ago, and now it was the only way to survive. The price of memory USS Bastion, 12 hours later. Kane stood in his private quarters, staring at the old picture embedded in the steel wall, a faded photograph. A woman holding 2 children, 1 boy, 1 girl. Their faces frozen in a moment of laughter years ago, before the riots, before the war camps. They were gone now. Disease, starvation, neglect. All while the Council watched and discussed intervention timelines. Kane didn't cry. He hadn't cried since Europa, but his knuckles tightened. A soft ping echoed from the console behind him. Briggs's voice came through. Admiral, incoming transmission from Council Command requesting direct negotiation. Priority Omega. Kane turned slowly, eyes cold. Put them through. A moment later, the face of Speaker Velen appeared in the projection field, his arrogance now replaced by something Kane recognized, the same fear he saw in dying men. Admiral Oss. Kane, Valon began carefully, we acknowledge Earth's advancements. We propose a summit. Kane didn't blink. Terms. You will be granted permanent council representation. No conditions. Independent fleet operations. Full access to trade routes. Technology. We will... Kane raised a hand. You'll give what should have been ours a century ago. Because now it's either that or extinction. Valon flinched. We never wanted conflict. Kane's voice dropped to a razor's edge. You wanted control. Now you get consequence. He ended the transmission without a word. Briggs chuckled from behind the bridge console. So, peace? Kane's eyes stayed fixed on the stars. No, not peace, balance. And for the first time, we hold the weight. Operation Lazarus. It was called Operation Lazarus, though no official record ever used the name. Years before, Kane stood in front of the Galactic Council and silenced them with 5 void black warships. The plan had been written on a piece of smuggled paper stained with engine oil and signed by 7 men who were all considered dead by every government on Earth. Not a single one of those men was dead. They were buried inside the Bastion-class vessels, sealed in cryo-hubs, brains wired into the targeting matrices, souls bound forever to the ships they helped create. Human minds sharpened by grief, rage, and the memory of being left behind while the rest of the galaxy looked away. Kane walked the Bastion's central corridor past rows of neural relay chambers where living operators monitored the emotional feedback of the ship's AI core, half code, half mind. The ship didn't think like alien AI. It wasn't pure logic. It was pain wired into steel. Earth had found a way to weaponize memory. Briggs caught up behind him, holding a report pad that was already glowing red. "Council's not wasting time," he said. "They've initiated a galactic emergency protocol. 43 fleets have been pulled from border posts. They're regrouping outside the Varnak sector." Kane didn't stop walking. "They're building a perimeter." "Yeah." Briggs nodded. Like that ever stopped anything worth fearing. Kane stopped at a viewport, staring out into the starfield. He didn't need visuals of the Council's fleets. He already knew how they moved. Predictable, defensive. They always acted like they had the luxury of time. Earth never had that. They were taught to move fast, hit first, and bury regret after. "Let them build," Kane said. "The more they prepare, the more they reveal. That's how fear works. It makes them loud." Briggs exhaled. "So what's next? Just hold position and let them sweat?" "No," Kane replied, eyes still fixed on the stars. "We poke them. The invisible war, the attack didn't come from the Bastion fleet. That was the genius of it. Hours after the Council's emergency summit, a dozen of their outer system listening stations went dark. No explosion, no energy discharge. Just gone. Blotted out like they were never there. The weapon, not a warship, a probe built on Mars, powered by a dark matter filament no larger than a human thumb. It folded space around the target until the structure collapsed under its own atomic signature. It didn't kill. It erased. The Council blamed rogue asteroids. Kane knew better. That probe had been launched 7 months ago. The real war had started. Long before his speech, Earth Command Corps, Deep Vault 9, sub-equatorial defense grid. Director Harlan lit a cigarette in the dark, the ember flaring against the cold steel around him. He wasn't military, not anymore. He was the architect, the man behind the curtain who turned rage into blueprints. The Council had once offered him a seat in one of their think colonies. He turned them down, said he'd rather die with his boots on Earth soil than sit in an orbital ivory tower sipping protein wine while his people starved. Now he was their nightmare. Behind him, the screens pulsed with telemetry from over 50 hidden operations, disguised weapons labs on Io, deep-sea black site silos under the Antarctic, AI integration nodes buried beneath abandoned New York, and the crown jewel, Sentinel Protocol. "Have the Leviathan-class vessels moved?" he asked, not looking at the aide behind him. "2 out of Hellerith space. They're cloaked but tracking. We have eyes." "And the Council?" "Still debating. The Kalari want to stand down. The Hellerith want to preemptively strike. The Venturi are fragmenting." Harlan smirked. "Typical. When it comes time to bleed, no one wants to go first." He puffed once more, then crushed the cigarette under his boot. "Send the next probe." The aide hesitated. "Sir, they'll know it's us." "Good," Harlan replied, stepping back into shadow. "Let them know. The breaking point USS Bastion command deck." Briggs stepped up beside Kane, voice low. "They've confirmed the probe. Council scrambling. Communications are frantic. They're pushing for a closed-door alliance vote." "Closed door means they're scared," Kane said. "Still trying to contain the narrative," Briggs said. "They can't." "No," Briggs said. "Not anymore. That moonstrike, those probes, the Black Fleet, we're in their heads now. They don't see Earth. They see death in human skin." Kane's eyes stayed locked on the stars. "We're not here to destroy them," he said quietly. "That's the difference. They conquered with fear. We conquer with memory. Our scars are deeper. Our rage is older." Briggs looked at him. "And what happens if they call our bluff?" Kane turned. "They won't. The living ship's Varnak sector, Council Armada staging point." Commander Reel of the Kalari High Guard floated in his command vessel, his crystalline skin pulsing with frustration. His species had long advocated for coexistence, but they weren't fools. Earth had crossed a line. No one built warships like that in secret unless they intended to use them. Yet as he reviewed the telemetry, something gnawed at him. The warships were still idle. 5 of the most dangerous vessels in the galaxy, and not a single one had fired a second shot. They could have leveled cities. They could have erased orbital docks. They didn't. Why? He turned to his first officer. Dispatch a covert drone. Get within range. I want to see if those ships breathe. The officer nodded. Hours later, the drone returned. What it recorded would change everything. The ships weren't just powered by dark matter. They were alive. Each, one humming at a vibrational frequency that matched human brain patterns under duress. Fear, anger, pain, all encoded into the ship's systems. Real watched as the drone scanned one hull and triggered a neural reaction. The ship screamed, not sonically, but psychically. The drone pilot died from brain hemorrhage. Earth hadn't just built ships, they'd built wounds and given them engines. Really. Realized the war wouldn't be fought over territory. This was about principle, and Earth's principle was simple. If we are to suffer, you will remember us in agony. The choice USS Bastion, private quarters. Kane sat in the darkness. The message came through without warning, not through military channels, not through diplomatic ones. It was a private transmission, routed from 3 council systems, buried in encryption, with a single voice on the other end. It was Jarth Saul. You've made your point, Kane, Saul said. Loud and clear. You've terrified them. You've broken protocol, tradition, hierarchy. You've made them beg. Kane said nothing. Saul's voice turned quieter. But how far does it go? How much is enough? One more moon, one more weapon test? How long before the galaxy stops being scared and starts uniting against Earth? Kane leaned forward, speaking for the first time. They should have united when our cities burned. They should have stood with us when we asked for clean water and real medicine. They watched children eat plastic and called it natural selection. You can't change history, Kane. No, Kane said, but I can burn it to the ground. The transmission ended. Earth didn't need to fire another shot. The galaxy was already shaking. And Kane wasn't just leading a fleet, he was leading a funeral march. Not for alien civilizations, but for the old myth of a weak humanity. The broadcast, the space around Council World, was no longer calm. The once peaceful hub of galactic diplomacy had turned into a militarized fortress overnight. Battlecruisers circled like vultures. Defensive satellites blinked awake after decades of disuse. Scanners pinged constantly, desperate to catch a glimpse of anything Earth moved. But Earth wasn't moving, and that terrified them more than anything else. Because Kane had made it clear, Earth didn't bluff. Inside the Bastion's briefing chamber, the room pulsed with low red light. Data hollows flickered in silence. Fleet command officers lined the circular table, all hardened veterans who had bled for Earth in forgotten battles the Council never acknowledged. Most had scars. All had something broken inside. Kane stepped in, eyes sharp. Status. Briggs stood and gestured at the display. Councils deployed a sensor wall across the Tyrian belt. 66 capital-class vessels. 24 drone fleets. On standby. They've labeled the entire sector a black zone. They're bracing. Bracing, Kane said. Makes them hard. Briggs nodded. Which makes them soft. A ripple of quiet amusement moved around the room. Then Kane tapped a small device on the table. A second display lit up, this time showing Earth itself, or more accurately, what was left of it. From space, it looked whole. Blue oceans, green, stretches, white clouds. But beneath that thin veneer, Kane knew the truth. Every major city was underground now. The surface was a graveyard, dusted with ashes of old wars, buried metal, and forgotten mass graves from the resource famines. There was no peace on Earth, just preparation. We've made our point, Kane said. Now it's time they see the cost. Briggs frowned. You want to strike? No, Kane replied. I want them to see where we come from. He turned to the holotech stationed at the side wall. Patch a transmission to the Council's public broadcast channel. Full spectrum. Live. Live? The tech asked. Live, Kane said. The Truth Broadcast Council World Orbital Broadcast Dome. The broadcast pierced every system. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't hidden behind diplomacy or moderation. It was raw, direct, and human. First came the images, the real. Earth, cities in ruin, children born in shelters, skies choked with soot, streets buried under rusted towers, mass graves turned into community gardens. A woman holding her son's hand as he died from a curable disease because the council denied medical tech to unstable client worlds. Then came the voice. Kane. This is the world you ignored, he said coldly. This is the home you deemed unworthy. You looked at our dying planet and turned away, not because you couldn't help, but because helping us meant sharing power. Delegates froze mid-sentence. Ships paused mid-formation. This isn't about war, Kane continued. It never was. This is about memory, about consequence. We begged, we bled, and you laughed. The screen flickered, showing a council archive clip 20 years old. A Venturi diplomat mocking Earth's inability to create clean oxygen zones. Then a clip of a Hellerith delegate labeling humans as biologically prone to savagery. Then back to Kane's face. Now you watch. You remember. And you wonder if maybe, just maybe, you created your own executioner. The broadcast cut out. And just like that, the galaxy was forced to face what they never wanted to admit. Humanity didn't want to destroy them. They wanted them to feel the weight USS Bastion Bridge. Briggs stepped beside Kane, both men staring at the star map. You think that was enough? He asked. No, Kane said, but it was a start. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. It's not about forcing them to accept us anymore. It's about forcing them to confront themselves. That's what they fear more than us. Guilt. Briggs didn't reply immediately. He studied Kane's face, noting the cracks in his armor, the dark circles under the eyes, the stiffness in his posture. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was something deeper, personal, relentless. You ever sleep anymore? Briggs asked. Kane gave a humorless chuckle. Sleep? You think a man like me gets to sleep after what I've seen? Briggs didn't press further. Kane suddenly turned. Pull the Bastion back. Briggs blinked. What? Let them breathe. Pull all 5 ships into deep orbit. Cloak them. No contact for 48 hours. Briggs frowned. They'll think we've backed off. Good, Kane said. Let them think. Let them stew in paranoia. The moment they start to hope, we show them just how wrong they are. The Fracture Council Internal Security Chamber. Undisclosed location. The Council wasn't unified, not anymore. The Kalari and Venturi factions were already splintering. Protests broke out on 4 worlds after the Earth broadcast. Young citizens asking why no one had helped humans when they needed it. Why all the lies? The Hellerith were preparing for a first strike. They didn't want questions. They wanted silence. And so they began building Project Sunfall, a weapon meant to detonate a star, targeted at Sol, a warning, an extinction-level message. But they didn't know Earth already knew. Inside Bastion's intelligence vault, Kane and Briggs watched the intercepts. They're going to burn the sun, Briggs whispered. They'll fail, Kane replied. We already have countermeasures in place. Briggs looked at him. You let them plan it. I wanted them to, Kane said. It's one thing to deny aid. It's another to plan genocide. I want the whole galaxy to see that we're not the monsters. He leaned forward, his voice low. They are. The Cradle Earth Vault 0. The hidden cradle, deep beneath the Himalayas, far below old military ruins, was something even most of Kane's command didn't know about. The cradle, a neural lab where the minds of Earth's most brilliant scientists, tacticians, and even soldiers had been preserved digitally. Living consciousness, fragmented and stored in a quantum network. This was Earth's true weapon. It wasn't dark matter, it was thought. From this vault, Earth didn't just react, it predicted. Simulations, war games, cultural collapses, emotional panic chains. They had modeled every outcome the Council might take, And every single one ended the same way. If Earth stood firm long enough, the Council would eat itself from the inside. The Betrayal USS Bastion Observation Bay. Kane stood alone, watching the stars again. He wasn't a hero. He didn't pretend to be. He was the result of decades of silence. He was what happened when compassion was denied long enough for rage to ferment into purpose. His mind wandered back to the crater that used to be São Paulo, back to the screams under the metal ruins of Cairo, back to the day he lost his brother in the radiation fields of Mexico City, all because the Council refused to share shielding tech with low-stability nations. This wasn't about payback. This was about writing history with a knife instead of a pen, and he was just getting started. In the galaxy's political heart, silence had never been so deafening. 12 days had passed since the Bastion warships disappeared from visual and sensor range. Not a trace of radiation, not a single pulse signature, just gone, like they'd never existed, and yet no one believed they were gone. They lingered in every conversation, every decision, every breath taken in the council chambers. Alien leaders argued more with each other than they ever had with humanity. The panic was no longer about if Earth would strike again. It was about when, how, and whether they'd see it coming. But Earth wasn't watching anymore. It was listening. Inside the Bastion, Kane watched data floods pour in. Every intercepted transmission, every troop deployment, every shift in power balance from across the galaxy, all compiled and analyzed by the Cradle's AI. He didn't need to move ships or fire weapons. Not yet. Fear had already done the heavy lifting, but Kane wasn't satisfied. He wasn't interested in simply humiliating the Council. He wanted irreversible collapse. Briggs approached from the side of the command deck, holding a new report. His expression was unreadable, but Kane could feel the tension. "We've got a breach," Briggs said quietly. Kane's jaw tightened. "External?" "No," Briggs said, eyes dark. "Internal." Kane didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just nodded once, and Briggs led him down a steel corridor away from the main deck into the classified command tier. Level 9 security hold B7. The holding chamber was dimly lit, walls pulsing with anti-telepathic shielding. Inside, a man, hands bound, eyes hollow, and a bloody split above his brow. He was human, former Earth Naval Intelligence. A name Kane knew too well. Commander Lyle Treener. He was one of the Lazarus architects. Trusted, loyal, or so they thought. Briggs stood beside Kane at the thick observation window. "We found him slicing transmission data. He was sending reports to an untagged relay on Andromedas 4. We traced the encryption. It was council grade." Kane didn't flinch. Treener had been there. Since the early days, since before the ships were even hull frames. A ghost from Earth's dirtiest corridors, trained in infiltration, disinformation, sabotage, the kind of man who didn't break because he had nothing inside left to break. Until now. Kane entered the room. Treener didn't rise. He just looked up, one eye already swollen shut. "You going to kill me?" he asked, voice flat. Kane stood across from him, arms crossed. "I'm trying to figure out why I shouldn't." Treener coughed, something rattling in his chest. "Because it's already too late." Kane said nothing. Treener leaned forward, face twisted in something between guilt and fury. "You think we're scaring them into submission, Kane?" "No. Pushing them into desperation. You think they're going to roll over and hand you power? They're building something. I saw the files. They're calling it Event Chain Alpha." Kane's brow twitched. "What is it?" Treener laughed bitterly. "Their last resort. They're not just going to strike back. They're going to rewrite time. Time War Council Research Corps, Temporal Division." For years it was a myth. Whispers that the Kalarian Hellerith had developed temporal displacement tech. Experimental, highly unstable, but capable of isolating key timeline junctions. No one believed it existed, until now. Operation Sunfall had failed to launch. Earth's spies had exposed the plan to ignite Sol. The galaxy's opinion was rapidly turning against the Hellerith and their warmongering stance. So they pivoted. The idea was insane. Send a single operative back in time to Earth's third interstellar war. Before Cain's rise, before Lazarus was born, and erase the man from history, assassinate the past to control the present. The plan was already underway, and Cain had no idea how close they were to succeeding. Bastion intelligence vault. Cain paced in silence. Briggs stood across from him, hands clenched. If they alter the timeline, they won't, Cain snapped. Briggs narrowed his eyes. You sure? Or just hoping? Cain stared at the display of Earth's timeline across a swirling, temporal projection. His face looked carved from stone. If they've committed to a time breach, they're gambling on perfection. One flaw, one variable out of place, and the entire operation collapses. Briggs leaned forward. What if you're that variable, Cain? What if all this, all of us, only exists because you made it through that war? They take you out. They take out the whole command chain before it ever forms. Cain looked at him, eyes dark. Then we break the rules first. The paradox deep cradle core, Earth. The AI was ancient by Earth standards, older than Cain, built during the resource wars by a team of engineers who had gone insane halfway through development. Its mind was fractured, but its predictions were perfect. Project Rook. Cain's face appeared in front of the core. They're making a temporal play. The AI's voice rasped from hundreds of speakers. Confirmed. Junction point. Sol system. Year 2174. Subject. Cain, Jonas. Rank, Captain. Status, pre-Lazarus, vulnerable. Cain stared into the screen. I want a displacement counterstrike. Full memory clone. You pick the vessel. The AI paused. Word selection. Operator 6. The past. Earth 2174. Rain hit the steel rooftops in thick, heavy sheets. Fires burned in the distance. Cain, young, unscarred, still human, was dragging a wounded soldier through rubble when something flashed above him. Not lightning. A shape. An intruder, a ripple in the air, and then gunfire. 3 shots, and the shadow fell. Cain turned wide-eyed. There in the wreckage stood a figure dressed in black, breathing hard, one arm burned down to the bone, but alive. Who the hell are you? Cain shouted. The figure smiled grimly. Call me a friend. Just know this. Live through today and you'll change the galaxy. And then he vanished. The memory would haunt Cain for decades. He would never understand it. Until now. Back to the present bastion. Briggs stared at the report. Temporal breach countered. Timeline stabilized. Cain nodded once. They tried to unmake me, he said quietly, and they failed. He looked up, steel in his gaze. That was their last card. Briggs stepped closer. So now what? Cain walked to the command deck where the stars waited. Now we stop hiding. Now we go loud. He tapped a sequence into the ship console. Moments later, the Bastion and her 4 sisters decloaked across major council sectors, 1 ship per sector, each aimed directly at the seat of power. A single broadcast went out to the galaxy. Cain's voice. Negotiation is over. Equality was refused. Remorse was ignored. Earth now operates under a new principle. You don't have to like us, but you will respect us, or you'll learn what silence truly means. The retaliation. The silence was shattered by screams, not from Cain, not from Earth, from the Council's outer colonies, Sector 17A to be exact, a remote trading system known for its diplomatic outposts and peacekeeping facilities. It wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't even fortified. That's why they hit it first. 3 Hellerith dreadnoughts decloaked above the colony's atmosphere without warning. They didn't issue demands. They didn't target military installations. They targeted civilians, farmers, children in orbital education stations, hundreds of thousands dead in under 3 minutes. They called it a containment measure, a calculated, preemptive strike to disrupt human-aligned insurgency cells. But Cain knew better. It was retaliation. It was the Council flailing, desperate to show dominance, desperate to prove that they still held the galaxy's leash. But they didn't realize. The leash had already snapped. On board the USS Bastion, the alert hit every screen at once. Live footage, intercepted Council command orders, thermal imagery of the burning colony. Briggs stood frozen, fists clenched. The room was dead quiet except for the sound of children screaming over an open distress channel. Then static. Kane stepped forward, slow, deliberate. He watched the data scroll, watched names get uploaded to the casualty list in real time. 17 kids from Earth were on exchange, Briggs whispered. Educators, engineers. They bombed them like they were insurgents. Kane's voice came out cold. They were insurgents. Briggs blinked. What? Kane didn't turn away from the screen. Anyone who dares to educate in a system that treats humans like animals. Anyone who spreads truth in places built on lies. They've already declared their side. A long silence stretched between them. Briggs finally nodded. Then what's our next move? Kane stared at the council emblem on the screen. We hit them back. Operation Black Vow Operation. Black Vow was launched 7 hours later. Not from Earth, not from the Bastion fleet, from the cradle. Hidden silos beneath what remained of the Amazon, once a jungle, now a techno-fungal wasteland, opened to reveal 5 payloads that had been growing in silence for over 20 years. Dark matter seed pods encoded with viral AI constructs. Not weapons of mass destruction, weapons of memory. Each one was fired into a separate council homeworld, and when they landed, they didn't explode. They broadcast, all across Kalari space, Venturi megastructures, Hellerith sanctums. Civilians saw the truth. They saw Earth's ruins, Earth's dead, Earth's pleas. Footage from the 22nd century riots, the orbital purge of Dar, the Council's refusal to send medicine during the Europa plague. They saw faces, they heard cries, they saw themselves mirrored in Earth's past and realized they weren't different. They weren't superior. They were just lucky. Some cried, some revolted, some, tragically, took their own lives. But the one thing no one did anymore was deny what Earth had suffered. Back aboard the Bastion, Briggs paced, fire in his eyes. We've shattered half their systems from the inside. You hear the comms chatter? Council soldiers laying down arms, entire colonies refusing orders. Kane stood at the center of the bridge, staring out at the stars, still unmoved, still calculating. They hit civilians, Briggs said. We answered with truth. That's got to be the most human retaliation I've ever seen. Kane exhaled slowly. Doesn't mean the war is over. No, Briggs said, but it means we just rewrote what war looks like. Protocol Zero, but in the dark corners of space, truth didn't reach everyone. The Hellerith exarchs, the extremist leadership faction, met in a locked chamber buried beneath their capital world. Enraged by the Bastion's campaign, they demanded retribution. This is psychological terrorism, one of them barked. They're infecting our people with guilt. Another slammed a clawed hand on the table. We need to silence Earth's signal permanently, and so they resurrected Protocol Zero, a directive older than the Council itself. Banned, buried, forgotten. A solar core disruptor, small, undetectable, designed to overload a star's magnetic field and trigger a false nova. Its target, Sol, again. Only this time it wasn't theoretical. It had already been launched. Deep cradle core, Earth. Harlan stood over the AI monitors, sweat running down his spine. Where's the trajectory? He barked. The AI's response came cold and mechanical. Object classified. Velocity matches theoretical. Zero disruptor. Estimated impact on Sol, 11 hours, 42 minutes. Interception window, Harlan growled. 7 minutes. High failure risk. Target is cloaked and quantum fractured. Harlan grabbed the comm. Patch me to Bastion, now. The final Gambit USS Bastion command deck. Kane stared at the alert. Briggs read it out loud, his voice low. They launched a solar core disruptor. It's real. Kane didn't respond. Briggs turned to him. This is extinction, not just of Earth, of everything in the Sol system. I know, Kane said. You want to run evacuation? Protocols? Kane finally turned. No, we intercept. Briggs looked pale. Sir, we can't intercept that. It's designed to bypass everything we have. I didn't say intercept with tech, Kane said. I said intercept. And then he activated a private channel. Prep the Leviathan. The Leviathan wasn't a ship, it was a suicide weapon. One of Earth's first dark matter prototypes. Unstable, unsound, and barely functional. Its mass would collapse under its own core if activated in deep space gravitational wells. No one was ever meant to fly it. But now it was Earth's only chance. Kane stood in front of it, suited up. Briggs blocked the path. "Don't be stupid," Briggs said, voice shaking. "You go in there. You don't come back." Kane looked at him with tired eyes. "I was never supposed to come back from Europa either, or Titan, or Mars." He placed a hand on Briggs's shoulder. "Some of us are born to hold the line, Captain. Today, this is my line. There has to be another way." "There is," Kane said. "But it involves letting Earth burn while we find it." He stepped around Briggs toward the Leviathan's airlock. "I've watched too many things burn already." Briggs grabbed his arm. "What do I tell Earth Command? What do I tell the fleet?" Kane paused at the threshold. "Tell them Admiral Kane kept his promise. Earth will never kneel again." He looked back one last time. "And Captain?" "Yes, sir?" "When this is over, when the Council comes crawling back, when they offer everything we've ever wanted, remember that they only did it because they were afraid. Don't let them forget that fear. Ever." The airlock sealed. The Leviathan launched. The collision. In the darkness between stars, two forces met. One carrying the power to extinguish a sun, the other carrying the will of a man who had already lost everything. The Leviathan's unstable core sang as it approached. The disruptor, dark matter folding reality, around both vessels. Kane's last transmission echoed across the fleet. "This is for every child who died hungry while you watched. This is for every world you let burn while you debated. This is for Earth, the Yan." Collision wasn't visible to the naked eye. It wasn't an explosion. It was an erasure. Both the disruptor and the Leviathan folded into a gravitational knot that consumed itself, leaving nothing but empty space and the echo of a man's final choice. The aftermath USS Bastion Bridge. Silence. Briggs stared at the empty coordinates, where Kane had been. The fleet held position, waiting for orders that would never come. Then the communication channels lit up. Every council world, every faction, every species that had ever looked down on humanity. "Earth Command, this is Council. Prime, we wish to negotiate immediate terms for full partnership status. Earth Fleet, this is Kalari High Command. We formally apologize for all past transgressions and seek immediate diplomatic resolution. Bastion Command, this is Hellerith Central. Authority, we surrender all claims of oversight regarding human territories and request mercy." Briggs looked around the bridge at faces that were equal parts grief and rage. Finally, he keyed the comm. "This is Captain Briggs, acting commander of Earth's Deep Space Fleet. Admiral Kane is gone, but his words remain. Earth will never kneel. If you want to negotiate, you negotiate as equals. If you want to survive, you remember why we're here. And if you ever threaten human lives again, you'll discover that Kane wasn't the worst of us. He was the most merciful." The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, humanity had finally found its voice in the galaxy. It spoke with the authority of the dead, the strength of the survivors, and the promise that some lines could never be crossed again. The war was over. The reckoning had begun. Epilogue. 10 years later, Earth's cities still lay mostly underground, but now they were connected to the stars by trade routes that flowed both ways. Human colonies spread across 17 systems, each one protected by the memory of what happened when Earth stood alone. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was different now. There were human representatives in every major decision. There were laws protecting developing worlds. There were regulations preventing the kind of neglect that had nearly destroyed humanity. And in the center of the council chambers, where, once aliens had decided the fate of worlds they'd never seen, there stood a simple memorial, a piece of twisted metal from the Europa siege, inscribed with words that had become the galaxy's newest axiom: "Never again will civilization be built." On the graves of the forgotten, Admiral Jonas Kane never lived to see the world he'd fought for. But in the end, he had done something no weapon could accomplish. He had made the galaxy remember its conscience. And in remembering, it had found a way to be worthy of the stars it claimed to govern. The universe was vast and cold and often cruel, but it was no longer silent about its cruelty. And for humanity, that made all the difference.